This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The law of the land can help us, and it can hurt us. In pushing against laws that kept women unequal in the United States, Ruth Bader Ginsburg achieved many things for the first time in our nation's history. But she wouldn't be the first woman to sit on the Supreme Court. That honor went to Sandra Day O'Connor. The groundbreaking efforts and judgments by the two women who first served as justices for the entire nation are explored by Linda Hirshman in Sisters-in-Law, How Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor Went to the Supreme Court and Changed the World. And then, the Western system of justice treated Jews horribly for centuries. Perhaps the clearest example of that injustice was the Blood Libel, which traces back to a fixed trial with bad evidence nearly 900 years ago. E.M. Rose gathers together that evidence to tell the story of the murder of William of Norwich, the origins of the Blood Libel in medieval Europe. But first, here's my interview with Linda Hirshman about two women who changed the Supreme Court and the world. All right, so how did they change the world?
Well, they changed the world by being who they were before they ever got to the Supreme Court of the United States. And then they went to the Supreme Court and further changed the world. So Sandra Day O'Connor changed the world by being the first woman to lead a major party in the state legislature. She was the majority leader of the Arizona state legislature. That was a huge breakthrough. And then she changed the world by being the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States and giving all women the hope that they too could attain the highest position in their profession. Ruth Bader Ginsburg changed the world through the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, by leading the Women's Rights Project there, and she changed the meaning of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution to prohibit sex discrimination in all but the most extreme cases.
But what's also particularly amazing about in comparing the two of their careers, their early careers, that when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was looking for her first gigs, that she was applying to the liberal stalwarts. She was applying to the Ivy League schools. She was applying to the liberal justices on the federal bench on the Supreme Court for clerkships. And these liberal stalwarts kept saying, not a woman, not here.
And Ruth Bader Ginsburg felt that keenly. The Warren Court, the liberal Warren Court, had decided in 1961 that it was okay to discourage women from being on juries, which is a fundamental duty of citizenship. And Ginsburg always used that as an example of how even a liberal court could not see that women were human beings and citizens just like men were. So yes, it was harder. I always say it's hard. You can't move to the suburbs and get away from your wife. So it makes sex equality the most radical kind of change.
I think there are two things there where, first of all, there's Ruth Bader Ginsburg is now, and Sandra Day O'Connor is 12 years ago. But also, just by and large, feminism has been a liberal endeavor. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a liberal, and Sandra Day O'Connor was a conservative. And it's, I think, a lot of, I mean, I don't know, I've never heard any woman ever say, yeah, Sandra Day O'Connor, she's my feminist icon.
But a lot of women say Sandra Day O'Connor is my icon, and a lot of them are her clerks, and a lot of her clerks are liberal. One of them, Michelle Friedland, just went on to the Ninth Circuit, and there was a battle over her because she was clear on gay rights. So Sandra Day O'Connor is an icon for a lot of women and a lot of liberal women. She does not get enough credit. Liberalism spawned feminism, there's no question about that. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the pure example. But in social change movements, you need both impure examples and pure examples to make change. And Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg voted the same way in all the cases about women that came before them when they sat together, except two.
And now E.M. Rose on the trial that would change Jewish history for the worse. The Blood Libel is something that we all know about, that we know that it existed. And a lot of us and a lot of historians have been uninterested in exploring exactly how a blood libel came about. It just was, an anti-Semitic, horrible thing, and the details don't necessarily matter. But why do they matter?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, I think recently it's been dismissed quite frequently as bizarre fantasy, something incomprehensible, something crazy. And it is kind of crazy. It's crazy to us, and that's a way of saying it has no validity. But unless we look at the details, we don't understand the power, because bizarre does not last for hundreds and hundreds of years among all sorts of populations.
And so what you believe you've come to here is the real origin of all of it. And what is that story?
Well, a knight comes back to Norwich, deeply in debt in the wake of the Second Crusade. The Second Crusade was a major failure. People think of the Crusades, every knight's going out happily and successfully, in their view, from the First Crusade. But the Second Crusade was a major failure. So people are looking to blame someone to the loss. So I think we have to understand the broader attitude in that year, cultural attitudes and also financial. So there's a knight, he is deeply in debt and he kills his banker. And he goes on trial, because even in the 12th century you can't go around killing your banker and get away with it. And during the trial, his defender in court, in order to get him off a trial, a guilty charge, blames the banker. The banker was Jewish. But the banker's already dead, so he has to make it a charge that encompasses not just that one person, but the community as a whole. And so that's one thing I was always trying to understand, is why is it an accusation made against the Jewish people and not just particular individuals?
But almost all anti-Semitism can be narrowed down to being bizarre fantasy, right? You have the idea that Jews run all the money, that Jews run all the government, that Jews, that the Illuminati and the Elders of Zion and so on and so forth. Why is the Blood Libel different from a lot of those? Or
I think the Blood Libel is different because, for one thing, it was inculcated, it was taught, and I think that's very important. And it had a religious basis in the sense that one element of it, not the sole element, but one element is that it relates to Christian exegesis of the Bible in the 12th century. So it's not just a bizarre fantasy from nowhere against people you don't like. It's a bizarre fantasy based on a certain kind of interpretation of Scripture. And it's not just Hebrew Scripture or the Christian Old Testament. It has to do with the teachings of the New Testament. And I think that's one reason why Jews haven't understood it and why it's been so difficult to understand, is because people haven't looked in that teaching in medieval biblical interpretation.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPTM Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.